And good evening and welcome to tonight's Order Paper show, where we'll be covering quite a substantial range of bills from 2 weeks ago because, when there's school holidays, the MPs go onto a parliamentary recess. So we'll be covering the Education and Training Amendment Bill third reading, the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill, and the District Court Judges Amendment Bill to increase the number of judges by 1. So let's join our panel who is joining us in this evening. We've got the good old famous, Laura? We've got Nick Rani and we've got Frosty.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, everyone.
So how is everyone tonight?
Still recovering from the 3 p.m. show.
Oh, God.
It's been a long day.
Oh yes, that took a hell of a lot of patience. Yes, that 3 p.m. show was quite up there. I have to be honest, it really did take it out of me doing the prep work for that show. Oh heck!
I became a chemical engineer overnight, learning about hydrogen bonds.
So can you please get your TARDIS out and head to 1944 and Roosevelt's cabinet room, ready to sit there and educate Harry Truman on the hydrogen bomb?
I need a DeLorean with some gigawatts.
Oh gee, you don't want to sit there and do the TARDIS like I would. Oh yeah, well, I've been told to start off with David Seymour for
yay!
Because he had to start the speech. So let's kick off with the self-appointed minister for everything, David Seymour.
Madam Speaker, I present a legislative statement on the Education and Training Amendment Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website. Honourable David Seymour.
Madam Speaker, I move that the Education and Training Amendment Bill be now read a third time. Madam Speaker, I want to thank all of the people who have contributed to this legislation. I want to thank my colleague, the Honourable Erica Stanford, Minister of Education, and I see Katie Nimmin, Chair of the Education and Workforce Select Committee, along with other members of that committee who shepherded the bill through the committee stage faster than usual, but with no less care and attention, and made valuable improvements to this legislation. It has been a very good example of what Parliament can do when people are committed to a cause. And I don't believe that there's any greater cause for this country's long-term future than the simple equation of how much knowledge is transferred from one generation to the next. Because a knowledgeable and educated population can overcome whatever challenges we may face with the economy or foreign affairs or climate change or public health. An educated population will be able to solve those problems, but an uneducated population that hasn't learnt the best knowledge from generations before them will be able to squander even great prosperity that this country currently has. That's why it matters so much, and that's why I think we saw so much commitment from those people involved in this legislation, and perhaps more than any for the enormous detail that has been meticulously put together. I thank the employees at the Ministry for Education, the policy team, particularly Andy and Jen and all those who support them. They have done an absolutely outstanding job. And what is this cause in this bill? Well, this bill has 3 parts, 2 of them relatively simple and 1 of them more complex, and I would argue ultimately more important. The first is that we are removing the network management requirement for early childhood education centres. And this comes from many complaints from early childhood educators that it is absolutely insane that in order to open up a business that people in your community want, you have to go and ask the government if the people in your community want it as much as you know they want it, because you're risking your money to do it, and yet somehow the people at the government are supposed to have a better idea than you do. And members on the other side, we're going to have a bit of a history lesson later in the speech, so don't worry, that's coming. But actually, there's a country called Russia where they tried this approach to economic management for about 70 years. It didn't work. Even they've abandoned it. It's only the Labour Party and the Greens that persist with trying to centrally plan economies with these kinds of decisions. So now, you don't have to do network management. If you want to expand or open a new early childhood education centre, then you can just do it. But the real judge is the parents. And you know what the parents say to me? When I go and visit ECEs and I ask the parents, they say, I want my child to be happy, I want them to be safe, I want them to be growing. And I think parents of New Zealand are better. And the opposition's asking, is that what the parents say? Yes. And if the member would like to visit some of these centres or, venture out of academia or out of this house, he might find that is what the parents say. And actually, I think the parents are better to judge it than the government. And the second thing we're doing is we're updating the attendance records. It's interesting, Madam Speaker, the attendance records actually are set under 1951 regulation, which was made under 1914 legislation. So you could almost argue, not quite, but almost argue, that our attendance regulations predate World War I. And this is a government of the future. So we are going to update the way that attendance regulations are made, and every day from next year, every school student management system will be pushing rich data about student attendance into the Education Department's or Ministry of Education's data warehouse, so we can understand who's not attending, and we can start to dig into why, and we can start to work out if the things the government and schools are doing to improve attendance, and parents for that matter, are working, so that we can do more of the things that work and less of the things that don't. It sounds simple. To most New Zealanders, to most people in business or running a farm or their household, it is simple. It's how you do business every day, and it's actually how this government is going to start getting stuck into the business of getting children back to school. But, Madam Speaker, coming to charter schools, we're introducing the simple idea that not every insight into how to engage children in learning and pass that knowledge from one generation to the next can be found in the Ministry of Education or Wellington or even amongst the wise members of Parliament in this House. Sometimes the best knowledge exists out in the community. Most times the Maori Party say, and I actually for once think Te Pāti Maori are right. You'll notice when I talked about communist adherence, I didn't talk about Labour I talked about Labour and the Greens, not the free market Te Pāti Maori, for whom I have great hope. If they could just get over themselves, I think they could contribute a lot to this House and life in New Zealand. And it's not surprising because the Iwi Leaders Forum have written to me in strong support of charter schools because they know that communities know more about how to engage their children than the people in Wellington most of the time. And so we're going to invite people in communities to start up schools, and they're going to get the money the state would have spent on the same child at a state school that's going to go to the school they choose to go to if, and this is important, high standards are met, if high standards of attendance are contracted in, if high standards of achievement are contracted in, if they show that they're using their money wisely with financial probity, then they will continue to get their money and they will be able to use that money for the best effect to get those children at school engaged, achieving and learning so that they can actually learn skills that turn into qualifications, that turn into jobs, that turn into careers, that turn into a sense of achievement and feeling good about yourself. That's why we're doing it, Madam Speaker. And I heard last night from the Labour Party that they would like to shut these schools down. Now, their bark was in their bite. They didn't do it last time. All the schools carried on. But with one change, that they don't want them to operate without union contracts. You see, that's the thing about these charter schools, is that teachers get paid like most New Zealanders on individual employment agreements. And if they're good, they can get paid more. And if they're not good, they can get fired. And here's why that matters, Madam Speaker. We run education for the children. You see, the thing is, I was looking at some statistics the other day. We spend $20 billion a year on education. 60,000 kids are born in this country every year. If you do the maths, it can be challenging on the other side, but that is $330,000 per citizen, lifetime education spending. And yet, what do we get for that? I look at the UE, the University Entrance Achievement, and for the most prosperous, wealthy and advantaged students, 82% get UE. But for the most disadvantaged students, 30% get UE. Now, I said there was a lecture coming. There's an old book called The God That Failed. And The God That Fails is the stories of former adherents of the Communist Party who realised it didn't work and left. And they wrote this book, and it's a wonderful set of essays. Now, I would put it to the Labour Party that when you spend $330,000 per citizen, and the most disadvantaged students are nearly 3 times less likely to get university entrance than the most advantaged students, your God has failed. Sorry, Labour, your God has failed. Because you spent all the money, but the wealthy kids from the good backgrounds are still doing pretty good, and the poor kids you were supposed to help are still failing. And that's why I'm proud to be here in this government and standing as an ACT MP, setting up schools that allow people to choose their own destiny. Tino rangatiratanga, we might call it. The ability for people to use their knowledge in their society and their community, to take the funding that the government would have funded and use it, you would have provided for those children, and use it for better effect, to make sure that children have that opportunity to feel good about themselves, to learn, to engage, to have it done their way, not to feel unsafe or bullied, but to actually go along and build their own future, not only for themselves, each in their own way, but for the future of this great country of ours. That is what this policy of charter schools really means for the future of our country. And I challenge the opposition. Where are your ideas other than more money for our union mates? Not the teachers, but for the unions, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Charter schools don't have to use the unions' contracts. That is what we are here to end, to give freedom and choice to New Zealanders to make their own future. And sorry, Labour, your God's failed.
Madam Speaker.
So he's trying to make it out that I can go and ring up my 96-year-old grandmother, ask how to do attendant rates. Beware, I could ask about staff attendance absentee rates, as well as student attendance absentee rates, because that was Grandma's job as associate principal of Poirot College, was dealing with staff absentees. Yeah, I could sit down there, go and set up a play group in the middle of my lounge, call it Daddy Daycare, play the movie from Daddy Daycare of Eddie Murphy back all those years ago when I would have been, 10 or 11 when it came out? You know, it's easy to sit there. Do I need to be criminally checked to sit there and work with these preschools? And am I allowed to have my employees that I employ to be qualified and on a CEA? And will teacher-only days actually be in those CEA contracts as they are for secondary school teachers from the 2019 agreement? Sorry, just my little quick rant before we get to the panel.
Yeah, let's get on with this. What the fuck has the Soviet Union got to do with any of this? I mean, the Soviet Union did not collapse due to a lack of charter schools. Can we be fucking clear about that?
It was nothing to do with education. I think it was to do with, what was
military
it called?
Expansion.
Yeah, fascism. I don't know. Something.
Okay, to David Seymour's point, there is a wonderful video game series called Bioshock, okay, which
Yeah.
serves as a critique on Ayn Rand's objectivist philosophy. The idea that one ought to follow the self-interest and profit off their own abilities and ambitions while being virtually uninhibited by others, resulting in conflict, chauvinism, and ultimately the subjugation of individuals by those who have the most amount of capital. There's my little rant for him. Go play Bioshock, ladies and gentlemen.
I was going to say Nick is the person who's a qualified teacher in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know how to approach David Seymour, because the problem is you could just like laugh at him, and but you got to take him seriously, because he is. I mean, this is like privatization, full on. I mean, he's just ripping our public education system to shreds, and it's bloody scary, to be honest. What he's up to, he's going after our early childhood sector. I mean, our early childhood sector at the moment is completely on the road to privatization right now. One of the biggest families that owns early childhood sector is also one of the biggest donors to the ACT Party, the White family, and they are just fully going full steam to privatize the rest of the early childhood sector. They were also one of the largest donors to the ACT Party in the previous election. So this is like Christmas for that particular family. I mean, in terms of charter schools, this is like a massive grab of state-funded money going from where it should be going, which is into our public schools, out into private capital, and that's just
private driven profits that clearly want public money because they can't make it in the actual true world of free market capitalism with private money.
I mean, this is just something that we should just be strongly resisting, because it doesn't work. We just know it doesn't work. It didn't work last time. Why should it work this time? And it's going to degrade our public school system, because ultimately it's going to be sucking money out of our public school system and sending it out into the private market and to an experiment that just doesn't work. So I cannot understand why we're doing this, other than to line the pockets of big business, corporate interests, wealthy donors of political parties. This is outrageous. We're seeing this right across education, healthcare. It's just all over the place. And this is our kids we're dealing with here. So this is crazy.
So, Frosty, as someone that David Seymour says you should not have a right to have a say in anything until you turn 18,
Oh, right. Yeah.
we'll give you a right to say on the show.
I think there is. I can see why you got me on now, because I think I'm going to be the only one here who comes to defend charter schools to some extent. But I
I
think
didn't know you had anything to do with charter schools.
David Seymour, I think there's an argument to be made for charter schools, but David Seymour presents it in the worst possible way imaginable. Right? I think there is an argument that communities need more say over how they get their education, because from what we have seen, the state system isn't helping, right? It isn't improving outcomes. It isn't preparing children for the future, and we're seeing that with the attendance rates. I think, what was it? I've got a stat here that in 2023, just 47% of students met the minimum regular attendance target of 90% or 9 days out of 10. That is abysmal, and I think it goes to show that maybe there is an alternative out there, and where the charter schools is at, I think the results you'd find are varied. I think there's more studies done overseas in America and in the UK and in Canada, because it's been there, it's more established over there. New Zealand really only had charter schools for a short period of time, and we saw very mixed results. I think one of the better ones was the Vanguard Military School. I think, and then there was one that had to be bailed out by the government because it was, not teaching.
Straight out mismanaged.
Yeah, it's completely mismanaged.
Yep.
So I think it's with charter schools. I don't think you can do a blanket yes or no. Is it good or is it bad? I think it's a case by case basis, and you have to really take this really carefully, because there is a risk there where you will be leading into more privately
At
educated.
which point did the attendance rates, like if we break it into, say, primary, intermediate, secondary school, where was the drop in attendance rate? Where did it go off the rails? Like, was it at a primary school level, at a intermediate level, or at a secondary school level?
I do.
Does they have a breakdown on there
I
or
don't
not?
have that stat on me currently. All I do have is the last year's statistics and term 2 of this year's stats, which is a 53.2%. We've improved by about 6% over the course of a year, but even then, that's terrible, and the state system isn't helping. I think there is an argument to be made that maybe communities should get more say over the way the community helps. In charter schools, we've seen in some examples have succeeded, and in certain examples it hasn't either. It's very, very mixed, and I think what David Seymour's going is charter schools is the answer, the only answer, which is completely incorrect. But what a lot of other people are going is that charter schools are completely bad and will completely destroy our education system, which I also think is wrong, because there are examples of charter schools succeeding and helping communities out in a way that is positive.
So just to ask everyone, what is everyone's thoughts on state integrated schools, where the schools receive the same amount of government funding for each student as the public schools, but they get the flexibility of a charter school? So, for example, your schools like Montessori's and Rudolf Stein.
Is that what David Seymour was talking about, where Labour essentially hadn't disestablished charter schools, but had turned them into more involved
integrated schools, which means the state has more control, but can keep many of the foundations. Nick probably is better in there.
A state integrated school is effectively a private school, as opposed to a school that has a character school, which is what the schools were changed to when they became charter schools, and then they were changed to schools with distinct character, and that's what the charter schools in the last administration were invited to be changed over to.
So would that be, say, like a state integrated school could be classed as St Patrick's College in Wellington?
But yeah, I'm not sure about St Patrick's.
Yeah, because I know that's the weird one of like it's half in but half out. Whereas I know Scots College is completely private, and Romatai College is completely state. Yeah, as the three colleges in the east. Well, and you've got St Catherine's, but effectively St Catherine's is just a subsidiary of St Patrick's. Shall we kick off with Jan Tinetti on the reply?
Yep.
Sure.
Madam Speaker, the question is that the motion be agreed to. Honourable Jan Tinetti. Madam Speaker, I hope lots of people go back and watch that speech, because that was a ramble from way back and made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Madam Speaker, today is a sad day for public education, a very, very sad day in New Zealand, because it's a day when the national-led government has put politics before education. It's put it before our learners, it's put it before our children. And Madam Speaker, here we go again. And I say here we go again because I've just opened with exactly the same words that the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins opened with in his speech in the third reading of the Education Amendment Bill in 2013. And this is like a treadmill. We are putting ideology ahead of our children here today. Madam Speaker, this is worse than 2013, Madam Speaker, because not only today have we got the introduction back of charter schools, we also have the repeal of the network planning as part of the early learning network in this country. How sad is that? The early learning network planning was part of the early learning action plan, Madam Speaker, and I hold that here because this is a well-respected document, not only here in New Zealand, but across the world. It was worked out with experts, it was worked out not only with our teaching workforce, but also with all of the peak body groups. It was worked out with academics of what was going to make the biggest difference for our early learning sector, Madam Speaker. Objective 5 is about the network planning, and part of that objective and part of the network planning was to give it time to bed in and to give it time to see the difference that it was making. Not even a year goes by and the minister's repealing it. Why is he repealing it? He's repealing it because the business model people that want to run their businesses in early childhood see that they're having their business models being hampered by the network planning. We're not putting kids at the centre. The minister, how embarrassing. How embarrassing for our early childhood network in this country that he is talking about Russia and business in Russia. We're not talking about coffee beans. We're not talking about inanimate objects here. We're talking about children's education. How can that be acceptable that we have an Associate Minister who likens kids' education to economic studies around and economic philosophy around the world? That is embarrassing for this country, Madam Speaker, and very embarrassing for the members of the coalition government, I am sure. Today, with the repeal of that, we put our community-based centres back at risk. We put our Pacific Learning Nest, our Punareo, our Kohanga Reo back at risk. And the Minister's response? Oh, well, in Russia, when they tried to stop businesses starting, in Russia, when we're trying to stop businesses starting, it didn't work. Again, I say, we're not talking about inanimate objects. We're talking about children and their learning. Now let's get on to the charter schools, an absolutely horrific ideological experiment that has failed in this country in many ways once before. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't some individual successes, but overall, charter schools absolutely failed. And here we go. We're hearing, I've never visited them. Oh, yes, I did, Minister. I absolutely visited some of those charter schools. Have you visited all of them, Minister? I ask you that, because that is not right either. Here we go. We're just going to get in there and say, oh, she hasn't visited them. That is absolutely wrong. Yeah, quiet now, you're absolutely right. It is an ideological experiment that absolutely failed. Did you visit the ones that failed, that put kids at risk, that we heard about? No. That's a no. That's an absolute no, because that didn't happen. The mai that happened, that we heard about in Select Committee, the absolutely horrificness, Madam Speaker, that happened for some of those kids. And why is it such a bad thing? Because we're using profit and profit-making enterprise to withdraw money from the public education system. And there it is, not putting kids at the centre. And that side over there, Madam Speaker, thinks that that's okay. That's great that they think that's okay, because when we see the failure this time and the hurt that will happen to some of those kids, that will be on their heads, Madam Speaker. That will be on their heads. And it's causing a distraction, Madam Speaker, saying, oh, look, it creates choice and flexibility. But what we do know about education, Madam Speaker, in this country is that when we devolve in education even further, we create greater inequities. And what we have seen overseas, with the research that has been seen around charter schools, inequity has become even greater, Madam Speaker. We have seen that time and time again. But we will hear from them about research that they will quote, that they will say, oh no, the Credo research says that. That has already been discredited because of its inability to have a peer review and the fact that it was funded by pro-charter school proponents. So why would the other side only go to that research? Because there isn't any other research that shows that this is a good thing. It shows that we are going to be devolving this education sector even further. But let's go to the real reason here, because we heard it from the Minister's speech there just now. This is about busting our teaching unions. In fact, last week when we were talking about this in the House, we had a member from the other side, I think it was Simon Court, yelled out, we don't care about unions, we only care about kids. Well, I can tell you from experience, Madam Speaker, that the people that become involved in the teaching unions become involved because they want the best for kids. They know that those unions want the absolute best. Oh, here we go. Doesn't that trigger them? Every single time, that triggers them. Say that word union. But if I said taxpayers union, does that trigger you in the same way? No, it doesn't. They, Madam Speaker, are incredibly triggered by unions. They do not care about conditions for teachers, which means that they do not care about conditions for kids. Because, Madam Speaker, teacher conditions and educator conditions are our kids' conditions. The reason, as I said, that people become involved in the unions is to ensure that they are getting the very best deal for their kids. Madam Speaker, I was involved in the National Executive of NZI Aotearoa. I did not do that for my own self or for my colleagues. I did it because I knew that we could get a better deal for our kids and that we had a strong organisation that could advocate for the best for kids. We talked to academics, we talked to people in the know about what was the best. I put it out there, Madam Speaker, that what does the other side do in that? They don't want to put children at the centre of what they're talking about here, as otherwise they wouldn't be going down this track. Madam Speaker, there has been overwhelming public opposition to this bill. 90.3% of submitters were opposed to charter schools. Madam Speaker, and here we have the other side, just proving my point. Mr McCallum talking about it being a union campaign, completely proving my point. Please keep speaking with your interjections, because you are going so far, Mr McCallum, and speaking exactly to my point, that they are triggered by something that they should not be triggered about. They are absolutely making this about busting those teacher unions. Madam Speaker, the reason why is because we have got such a strong body there that put our kids at the centre. Because I go back to say, Madam Speaker, that the people that work so hard in those organisations know that if they get it right for the educators, they get it right for the kids. I go back to that comment, and let's just put this into context. I go back to that comment that was made by that member last week saying we don't care about unions, we care about kids. I understand that that member was a civil engineer before he came into politics. That's like saying we don't care about the engineers, we only care about the bridges. Imagine if we did that, Madam Speaker, we'd have all our infrastructure falling over. These people have no idea of the importance of what our unions bring, but having said that, that means they have no regard for our teachers whatsoever. Madam Speaker, this has been a rushed process. Even now, Madam Speaker, we have to finish this off under urgency. Why do we have to finish it off under urgency? Because the arguments against this were so strong that it was taken so long that the Minister knew that he had to finish it under urgency. He gave it a rushed process, a shortened select committee, not giving people the opportunity to have their say. It is going to be starting next year. Next year is rushing it. This is going to have so many problems, Madam Speaker. We've seen it. We know we're going to have it back in the House to tidy up this bill because we've identified the sloppiness. We've identified where the issues are. Madam Speaker, this is, I go back to how I started, this is a sad, sad day for New Zealand public education.
I think we're going to be having a couple of springs pop out of the clutch plate.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could hear from Jan that she covered a lot of really good points there, but I think possibly the most interesting point was around how this is potentially the main point of the reform is around busting the teacher unions. And I think if we go back to 1991 when maybe, I'm not sure how many people on this call were alive back then.
I was.
You
I was 1 year old.
Yeah, I was. I would have been. Yeah, I was a 1990 baby. So
I was not old enough to join a union.
Very good, but
I was not old enough to go to kindergarten.
But I mean, the whole point of the Employment Contracts Act was very, very similar. It was all around busting the main unions at the time that represented workers, and I think Jan just made that point very clearly that charter schools could have the very same point. And I think if that's the case, then that's very sad because I when I was in the classroom, I didn't meet a teacher that wasn't passionate about the kids. And and I think if you make an argument that's on the other side of that, then I think you don't understand teachers because every single teacher I've worked with, every single teacher I know is passionate about the kids. And if you're not about supporting teachers, then really you're not about supporting kids. And it's a very unusual argument to make. But fantastic arguments from Jan.
It's pretty obvious that this coalition has really got a hard on for busting unions. I mean,
yeah. I mean, what are they expecting? What do you call it? You know, like the whole point of unions is that you can sit down there and you know what works, you know what doesn't work. You know, oh, I'm sorry, you're a bad teacher with 30 dyslexic children, but they didn't comply in a test format that doesn't work for people with dyslexia, so you're fired. Is that what they want? Was it Superintendent Chalmers using the Simpsons reference there to go, sorry, you're fired because you had 30 dyslexic students that didn't have grade improvements in a non-dyslexic curriculum that doesn't work for them?
Yeah, I mean, why should the government take responsibility when you can blame teachers?
This does scream
Or in the case of charter schools, non-teachers, because ultimately they're going to have people who are not qualified and have no teaching qualifications, or just basically anyone on the street that they pull in and put.
And I wonder how
There's
many
a great
of them
justification to underpay people.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I wonder how many of them would be criminals who have just been released from the local prison on a preventative detention sentence for for a sex crime.
If I could propose a counterfactual, what a lot of people on the right and libertarians seem to say is that, well, my child is homeschooled and he's taught by his mother and his mother isn't a qualified teacher and she is the best teacher for my child. What would you say to that then?
Oh, I was a child that was homeschooled. And I saw mixed results from other parents. I mean, you can have the best parent in the world. I was very lucky to have an educated mother and an educated father. I can't say the same for other kids. The outcome of their education has not been the greatest. So
I wouldn't necessarily shoot it down, but yeah, I've seen two different areas of it. I've seen probably more positive cases, but that's possibly who I've been in circles with.
Right.
I've not seen, but I've seen a couple where I've said, I pulled my kid out of school because of the vaccination stuff. And I'm thinking like,
yeah,
I know you're not really kitted out for homeschooling. And I mean, knowing what I know now, that probably wasn't the right decision. But that is on a case-by-case basis on every single issue. And there could be all sorts of different reasons why some people are homeschooled. I know one person who, her two oldest were schooled properly, but because her third one was autistic with was it wheelchair, a myriad of problems, it got to the point where it was easier to homeschool than send them to the, was it Miramar Central School to be locked in that cupboard.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, you know, there are different things there. And so those sorts of things there can sit there and do it. I do believe, however, that son will go to college when he hits that point, which is round about, it might be next year. It's very, very close to it. So, yeah, shall we move on to Dr. Lawrence Zunan?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
My favorite Indiana Jones
Sunan.
impersonation.
Let us be clear, this bill is not about education. It is about privatization. This is about privatizing further our ECE sector, which is already struggling. It is about privatizing our education sector, which is already struggling. Madam Speaker, we have heard from Select Committee stage, we have heard in terms of the Committee of the whole House, we're trying to get any sort of sense out of the Associate Minister on this bill, and what we get is campaign slogans and politicization and divide and conquer technique. Madam Speaker, this week is New Zealand Chinese Language Week, so I would like to, enlighten the House on an old Chinese proverbs. 鷸蚌相争，渔翁得利. When the crane and the clam fight, it is the fisherman who benefits. Who actually benefits from this bill? It is not the children, it is not the teachers, it is certainly not the parents that they care so much about. It is the privatized company, it is the overseas companies who wants to come here and take New Zealand money. It is about the privatized ECE centers who wants to funnel the money offshore. It is not about education. Madam Chair, one of the things that we did when during the committee stage is going through the bill, because it is quite a rush process. We identified a number of issues with the bill that deserves some tweaking. So, in a lot of the amendments that I put forward, there were genuine amendments that would tidy up certain elements of the bill. But what we have seen from this government is that they actually don't care. They don't care what the other side is doing. They don't care whether they are genuinely amendments that is based on common sense, that is based on evidence, that is based on good grammar. It is just simply, we don't listen, we don't want to hear what we are just going to do what we want to do because this is what our coalition government has agreed to, despite the fact there are severe contradictions within what the Associate Minister and what the Minister is doing, within what the Associate Minister himself is doing in some of the announcements he's made regarding attendance. Madam Speaker, one of the things you find in terms of the announcements around charter schools is the fact that, the Associate Minister said charter schools will have a higher requirement. Well, apparently, that when you're looking at some of the EQI, when you're looking at some of the elements, charter schools only require 35% of regular attendance, where they want state schools to have 80% regular attendance. That's just one of many examples that we haven't heard. The minister can say, the Social Minister can say, it is tougher. Great. Sounds pretty. That's not what it actually means. Madam Speaker, when we are going through this bill, let's start with the charter school component. This is not. Charter school has been in Aotearoa before. It hasn't worked. They've been reverted back to state. They have improved outcomes during that stage, now that they're part of the state school. ECE centers, we are hearing that teachers are struggling. Parents are really concerned about where they're at. Parents are really concerned about how much more they have to pay for ECE because of the privatization component, because of the fact that when it comes to the privatization, when you are asking schools to be able to operate for profit, they would put profit over education. Now, Madam Speaker, the Associate Minister talks all about history and evidence and education, which sounds incredibly pretty. But what we have seen throughout the entire process is that there's not an ounce of evidence that they have considered. During the Select Committee stage, for example, we have mentioned that 90.3% of the people who submitted opposed charter schools. 96.3% of the people opposed the repeal of the ECE network. And people in the government side, people on the Select Committee could say, well, that's because the unions came out. Well, I'm sorry. Why didn't the parents come out then? If you think the parents care so much about it, surely they will weigh in and they will make a submission. Maybe because the people who submitted on it were genuine experts in the field with decades of experience that you have, sorry, Madam Speaker, that the government has decided to brush aside and not take it into consideration. That is not listening to evidence. That is not caring about the communities. That is not caring about what people genuinely think. No, that is just fancy politicization. Madam Speaker, what we're also seeing with this bill, and when we're looking at the evidence, again, the government keep on quoting evidence that's been used overseas. They keep on using different reports and etc. But again, none of that has been substantiated. None of that has credible peer review. Peer review is really important. The other thing, Madam Speaker, that I want to address is the idea of creating a non-existent culture war between parents and teachers. That is appalling, Madam Speaker. We are here talking about the future of our generations. We're here talking about Kotakitanga. We're here talking about everyone coming together to work towards the same goal. But what we are hearing instead from the Social Minister is like, no, we only want to hear from X group. The parents knows best. What does the union really know? This is not about this. The teachers, this is all about the unions pocketing the money. It's the same ecosystem, Madam Speaker. The parents need to rely on the teachers to do their job. They are professionals, going from ECE all the way to the tertiary sector, Madam Speaker. These are professionals who spent years perfecting their craft, who spent years, dedicating their life to the education of the next generation. In any other country, Madam Speaker, teachers are revered for the work that they do, for the nurturing that they do to our future generations. But apparently that is not the case here in Aotearoa, Madam Speaker. Why is that? Why are we creating this unnecessary cultural war between teachers and parents? That is unacceptable, Madam Speaker. Why? Why are we doing that? When we are looking at some of the things we have heard, from ECE teachers who are teachers in for-profit ECE centers, we're hearing about the stories of how they can't even take a break. They are on the verge of like, should I wear the diapers alongside my students? Because the minute I take a break, I break ratio. That is because when we don't resource enough, when we don't support our education sector enough, when we put profit over the lives of our teachers who looks after our students and our future generations and our children, this is what happens, Madam Speaker. Now, the Green Party wants to see a thriving public education system where everyone's able to thrive, teachers and students, and also teachers being able to work with parents, but we are not going to be seeing that with this bill. Madam Speaker, I'm flabbergasted at the fact that we are allowing this to go through under urgency, that we are allowed to divide our education system and being able to put in $153 million into a system that has no evidence domestically or internationally that has worked. I am horrified at the fact that we are allowing, that the governing party, the National Party, is allowing their coalition partners to lead them by the nose and spend all of their money. So, Madam Speaker, it's not that party's money. It is the taxpayers' money that the government is spending frivolously on vanity projects. Madam Speaker, I expect that the minister and members of the government on the other side, because they love the school system so much, will be sending their students to charter schools. I expect that. At the very least, I expect those members to be answerable to their communities on why their schools are no longer getting the funding that they deserve.
Katie,
Damn. Now that's the real education minister right there.
The future education minister in waiting. Yeah, quite strangely enough. Lawrence does really know his stuff, especially about the ECE.
That's because he's also worked as a teacher.
Yeah. I wonder if in the future, charter schools are going to have food in schools, but non-charter schools aren't. And that could be a competitive edge.
Mm.
I just am wondering, though, what are the alternative proposals that, like, the Labour parties and the Green parties are proposing? Because they keep saying this is bad, but we all know there's something wrong with the public education system, and I haven't seen any other proposals or alternative proposals to fix or remedy the problems that are within the public system.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think no one would disagree that there are problems with our public education system. I mean, I certainly spend a lot of my time arguing and having really good discussions with the Ministry of Education and a lot of different groups that we need to make our education system more accessible, more inclusive, certainly for disabled and neurodiverse students. It's not perfect, but I think the alternatives that we've seen here through this bill are certainly not the answer from my perspective. But I think it's probably a little bit too early in the cycle to start seeing definitive positions coming out from Labour, and I can't really speak for the Greens, but it's probably a little bit too early. Maybe you'll start seeing some things come out next year.
I agree with you, Nick. From a policy standpoint, it's still in discussion and development. Just speaking as a greenie, we have been talking about this behind the scenes.
Right.
I can't comment. I'm not part of any political party.
Well, I'm part of top, but we haven't had any discussions on it so far. We're
Oh, you're on top. Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
We've got our own parliament here.
Now, if anyone does know that in 2022 I did apply to become their treasurer, but they went with someone else.
Right.
That's right. I'm now the treasurer of the Newtown Residents Association, and I made my first important decision yesterday on what term deposit rate are we going to put our investment fund in for the next cycle. And I chose the 6 months at the 5.65% because that will deliver us the most money over the next 6 months.
Nice.
I know, but I'm expecting an OCR cut coming in the next was it later this month? So I wanted that locked in before the OCR came in. So yes, that's my my little one. I am the treasurer of RNRA. Okay, shall we see what Uncle Andy's got to say?
All right.
This is the coalition government keeping its promises. This has been very, very well signalled to the electorate. It was taken to the electorate, and I want to congratulate the Minister for shepherding the bill through. The simple concept here is that all of our children are not the same. One size does not fit all, and it gives the opportunity for some diversification, from innovation, and I think that is a great thing. What we've heard from the opposition is they won't work, or maybe it's that they work too well. The opposition is concerned that it will increase inequity, which must be the thinking it will work too well, and that's a terrible thing, isn't it? Maybe it'll be too expensive, and they're worried about things like paying conditions, teaching qualifications, and so on. But my appeal, just as Katie Nimmin has said, is to give it a go. For the opposition, to give it a go. For the unions, to give it a go. To fair-minded Kiwis, to give it a go, and let's see how it goes. Because we will be watching. We will watch the conversion process. We will watch the consultation, the engagement. We will watch the way in which charter schools engage with communities when they're set up. We'll watch those issues about, those things where communities have raised money for parts of the asset base, whether it's playgrounds or whatever it might be. We'll watch the costs. And most importantly, we'll watch the performance. We'll watch how the children engage in those schools, how the children attend those schools, because it ain't great in the state sector, and how they perform in those schools, what sort of results we get. Those are the important things. So I would say to the opposition, one of the things that's going to be really important is the quality of the information we get. I note that the charter schools are exempt from OIA to start with, and that is something which obviously we'll be wanting to see what the data looks like, so that we can all say these things work or they don't work. And that's what we need to know. And finally, Madam Speaker, the Honourable Giantonetti said that this is a sad day for the state education system. And I just say to her and to the opposition, look in the mirror, look at what you did, look at what we saw the performance of the state sector do in the last 6 years. It wasn't great. We are working very hard in this government to turn that around, and good progress is being made, because look at the performance, the attendance, the results, and this is about our future. Look at the assets themselves, the buildings and so on. It is not great at the moment. That needs to be turned around. Madam Speaker, we're working very hard to fix that system. This is about innovation and going forward. I commend this bill to the House.
I think Andy's found himself sitting on another fence.
I mean, I think there was an implication there that maybe Andy isn't necessarily in agreement that the charter schools are exempt from a lot of these.
Well, that is something in there. You're exempt from the IOA. Now, there are two approaches that can be done. You have an organisation that's exempt from the IOA, but still actually issue the information out like an IOA. Or you might go, oh, sorry, we have to tell you because we don't feel like it. Right. And that's the problem of what happens when you exempt someone receiving public money from the IOA.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people IOA, it's in the ballot, and I've come with a response. We're not subject to the IOA. This information is given based on the goodwill of the organisation. And it was things about ratings. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know Andy through my history with local government, and I have a lot of things I want to say about that speech, but it looks like there was a card that was picked up and read, but I think probably the only serious point in there was around the transparency of information. I think everything else was just fairly bullet pointish and reading off the card, but yeah, I don't.
Actually, Tanya Yankovic got told off about doing that on was it the armed shooters and was it amendment bill one that was read out earlier today. She actually got told off for doing that.
Well, at least they didn't read off the PC.
Oh, there's been so many people who've been told off for reading off their cards. It's like
yeah. Have we already given charter schools a go between 2014 2018, and the total cost averaged about 48 grand per student compared to the 8,000 spent on students in state schools?
Well, the cost per student for charter school is astronomical compared to the cost per student in state school environment, and the results they just don't stack up. So.
With that cost being so high, did that include capital expenditure to start the schools, or was that just the general running for those tax years or for those education years?
No, the capital was the capex or capital expenditure was separate.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is a fair bit of money, and in some cases was delivering results, and sometimes cases it wasn't.
Yeah, there's some really interesting. If a lot of OAAs have come out recently showing some fairly, let's just use the phrase loose governance arrangements around how some charter schools have been managed, and particularly some ones up in Northland, Whangarei, and they you know the one we're talking about, right? Yeah. And
One that shall not be named.
They're still
the one that possibly didn't have a proper board of trustees or something. It just had.
I actually have it written down somewhere.
Yeah, it's one that there's a whole bunch of land that was purchased and used for an alternative purpose.
Wasn't it farming or something like that?
Yeah, that's the farm one. Yeah. So there's all sorts of things that can be achieved when you are a charter school that are just completely off the table when you're a public school. And I mean, we're talking about public money here. This is taxpayers' money that's used for purchasing private land, for doing alternative things. It's just.
There was an example actually in Newtown, and this wasn't for charter schools or anything, but I think it was either in the 90s, it might have been on the cusp of the early 2000s, but it was around the same point when Wellington Hospital was going through its upgrade process. And so Newtown School approached the Ministry of Education to say, can we get a bridging loan to buy out between number 14 and number 28 Meehan Street and use that section of land to relocate the school one block up the road to be away from the busy main road, and then redevelop the old school grounds into, commercial development or something, on sell it into the private sector. So we buy one set of private property, develop it for a school, and then sell the old school. And it was actually declined by the Ministry of Education. It was around the same point that they were doing with the hospitals, because all those houses that were at the first section of Meehan Street opposite the school are now gone, and it's a car park. But that was something that was looked at back then, and that was a big no-no at the time. And that actually could have improved safety ratings and all that sort of thing for Newtown School, not being next to a main road.
I think there's a lot of issues with the Ministry of Education as well, because where I'm from in Aotearoa, there's a school that in a suburb in Aotearoa, there was a primary school was initially meant to be built there, but it kept getting delayed and pushed back. And then the Ministry of Education just essentially said, oh, we're not doing it because the population isn't growing enough. But then the argument was that we need the building a school in Aotearoa would make the population grow. And so I think it's
similar thing happened in Churton Park. So where Amesbury School is in Churton Park was one of those toss-ups, do we build a school there, do we not? And I do know in Paraparaumu there was a section of land that sat for 25 years empty to build a school that never got built.
Yep, that's the same with Aotearoa. There's a piece of land that was going to build there.
It'll be interesting to do it, because that's actually the area where both my grandparents were principals.
Right.
Because Grandma was associate principal at Paraparaumu College for 10 years out of his 17 years being there, and Granddad was Titahi Bay Intermediate Foundation principal. Before that, he was Paraparaumu East School. Before that was Hampton Hill School. But he was there when there was about the explosion of schools in the area.
Yeah. Aotearoa is the only suburb in that area actually that isn't zoned for any primary school. There's some houses that are in the suburb that are zoned for schools around the area, but there are some families that are completely left out of being zoned for any primary school. There is a college there, but you also need a primary school in order for
and actually, and this is something can go in there. When Aotearoa College opened, Paraparaumu College decided to make its big focus to be the Māori Pacifica go-to college of the time, and it meant the ethnic balance went from 75% Māori Pacifica to 90% in that 10 years that Grandma was associate principal. So it was quite, she saw the big jump in it.
And also in the poorer areas of that area, Māori Pacifica do make a far larger number of those lower socioeconomic areas.
And I do know that the current principal, who actually is a former teacher of mine at Paraparaumu College, Ragnay Maxwell, is literally rallying loggerheads, particularly at David Seymour, over there is the Food in Schools, because they have a very cost-effective Food in Schools program that runs on the smell of an oily rag.
There's a lot of schools that actually have a lot of cost-effective food lunch programs, and there's
Yeah.
very, very few out there that don't. The school I go to actually has a food lunch program, and when he mentioned sushi, about some schools getting sushi on television, the
Don't
fucking
forget it's
schools
woke sushi.
woke sushi. What school's getting sushi for their lunch? I mean, like,
I remember sushi once at college. Guess what? We made it in home
yeah,
economics.
and cooking you make it, but I don't remember the school serving it out for free. It's just a
No.
ridiculous.
And like, that could be an example of a school sushi might have been done in a home economics class.
He'd visited our school. There was a whole.
Were you the one that
Oh
had
yeah,
the
I remember
haka?
that.
yeah.
Was that the one, the haka, where he kind of turned up his nose and told you off? And
Well, we did a haka for him, and there was a big trouble about that because some shit went down. I don't know, but it was such a he's just not. I don't understand why he's the associate education minister. Like,
I'm still trying to find out where Paul
experience does he have?
egg and mung bean sandwiches school is. Or it wasn't eggplant and mung bean.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to find out which school, because I've not even heard that as a flavour.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what Takutai Ferris says.
I love Takutai Ferris.
Yeah, very
So
much.
do I.
Nā tātou i ngā pūkenga i ngā wānanga. O tinei a rātou
Parliamentary
te whakairo i
Giga
te ara. E ke panuku ai ngā mokopuna i roto i te ao mātauranga. Tēnā tātou i te mauroa o te iwi Māori ki te ara mātauranga. Hei whakawhitinga ki te ora, mō ngā tamariki, mō ngā mokopuna heke iho tuauri whai o io tatu mai ki tēnei rangi. Kia kahara te iwi Māori. Kia kahara tātou. So let me start by stating the obvious that this government has a juxtaposed approach to education. Completely idiotic. 2/3 of them want standardised, cookie-cutter, chicken factory hen education, and they think somehow, post a industrial revolution age, that in the technological age, that's going to cut it. Well, that just tells me they know nothing about education in 2024. And the minister can laugh, but as I listen to her speak about Māori education and kaupapa Māori education that I just described at the beginning of my speech, I can do nothing but laugh at her. Yeah, good on you. Your ideas.
Okay, that's enough.
60,000 kids. This fellow over here tells us 60,000 kids are born every year. 30%, 60,000 kids, 330,000 K each. Oh, it's a disgrace that the poor kids don't get UE. I described how Māori kids are getting UE at astounding rates in the beginning of my speech. Go back and listen to it, get the translation. So, 30%. Oh, bro, just be quiet. Be quiet. 30% of the people today, right? 30% of people today in this country under 25 are Māori. What are you doing for them? Zero. Don't tell me. I already know. Don't tell me. No, don't tell me. I already know. Wanganui. What does Wanganui know? Hey, what's happening in Wanganui? Not a lot. So, 30% of the people under 25 in this country are Māori, and they have kids at a rate of 2.8 per whānau. Work that out. Work that out. Seymour claims that the associate minister claims that the iwi chairs support his idea. They support the idea because the idea is about education models that are built on self-determination. They don't support your ideas, Seymour. Not in the slightest. I'll take you to the next iwi chairs and we'll see. Not in the slightest. So they can continue on. Community-led education can continue on as long as it achieves high success and standards. Well, the highest NCEA results last year came out of Kura Kaupapa Māori. A tino rangatiratanga-based model of education. A tino rangatiratanga-based model of education. Pohanga reo, a tino rangatiratanga-based model of education. Wharekura, a tino rangatiratanga-based model of education. Wānanga, a tino rangatiratanga-based model of education that your government gave 1% of its budget to. 1%. They're not charter schools. Sit down, Junior. Turi turi. Hoki ki te kāinga.
Hey, enough. Let's just lift the level, please.
Well, tēnā, tino rangatiratanga models of education have been in existence since 1981 and you've never supported them. Don't go fluffing your feathers like you're doing something good for it now because you're not. $6,500 per kohanga reo is not supporting tino rangatiratanga based education. It's a slap in the face and you're happy to do it. Nō reira, I'll just wind up by referencing the great achievement of the current Minister for Māori Education in the appointment of an advisory group. Kia ora.
Okay.
I so wish I was on Te Tai Tonga. I would very comfortably vote for him.
I used to be able to vote in Te Tai Tonga, but
Well, yes, but you've moved up the road. Actually,
I'll vote for Debbie instead.
were you living south of what was it called? You'd have to actually be living south of a particular street in Tawa to do that.
All right. Well, I've got family in Tawa, so maybe I can find the loophole.
Yeah, I can't remember which
Hold on a
street it
minute.
is, but McKellen Street's the Moana Aotearoa electorate boundary. But I'm just trying to think the Māori one might be a bit further south.
Right.
Yeah. So, sounds like Takutai.
He knows what he's talking about. He's a good orator.
Yep.
I remember bumping into Takutai during the last election on campaign trail, and he was an impressive orator. Like you could tell. I mean, he was just doing a small meeting, and there was not a lot of people there, but you could tell, like, he knew what he was. His ability to deliver a message and to reference, his ability to put together a speech was impressive, even back then. So yeah, he's an impressive leader and orator and politician. So yeah, he's doing some good work. All right, he's certainly getting under the skin of certain government members, which is probably pretty good.
Seymour's very, very triggered.
Oh yeah, there's certainly quite a few
Seymour's
of them that
triggered.
are quite triggered, even just by Te Pāti Māori, even just standing up.
He's scared of Māori, despite him being Māori himself.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I think there's a Winston quote that he absolutely, David Seymour discovered his Māoriness like Columbus discovered America purely by accident, which is a very good quote by him.
Yeah, but true. It's a bit like.
now, I want to know, do I have it in there? It is very plausible.
But
it is plausible because of the number of generations of family in New Zealand from when they arrived to where I am.
Yeah. I think Takutai is right though in his speech where he says there is a dual I forgot the word, but dual like mandate going on here. You've got Erica Stanford, who I actually think is a relatively good education minister. She seems to actually know what she's doing, and David Seymour, who wants to completely gut any form of state-funded anything. And you could see two contrasts of how they want to run the education in the country, and I think it just mumbles the agenda that the government wants to go down. You've got on one hand a person who wants to go down this very libertarian path of the state has no intervention in anyone's life, and it's the private institutions and the individual themselves to do things. And you've got Erica Stanford who wants to make stricter regulations, no phones in schools, have structured literacy, whatever that
and
means.
have teacher-only days.
I thought the teacher-only days was David Seymour's bill. But
No, David Seymour announced they're getting rid of them at the same time that Erica Stanford then later on had to announce they had to actually increase them for the new education requirements. And also they've been in the CEA from at least 2019 from what James Barber told me yesterday. But from what I know from Grandma, they were a thing when she was a teacher. And they date back to 1949 when both my grandparents graduated from teacher training college.
Yeah.
I think you raise a good point, actually. I think I'm not sure about this one. I don't know this for certain, but I don't think that the education minister is 100% on board with this whole charter schools business, because I think if you look at the parliament, whenever charter schools has been debated in the House, you will notice that the education minister is not there, and I think that says a lot.
Actually, going by looking at that picture at the moment, no, there is no Erica Stanford in there at all. But even David Seymour's gone now.
You know what I've noticed with David Seymour is that he clashes with a lot of people in National. Man, when he announces something, you see the counterpart of him from National, they're not there. It's like a constant tug of war between him and National.
But I think the reason why that is because the point that was just raised before is around the education minister is really trying to implement a whole lot of policy that's coming out of the ministry, which is really around structured literacy and maths, which is really around control and trying to implement things that are coming out of the ministry, whereas you're starting to see Seymour coming from a completely different place. Like he's trying to take things away from the ministry, which is completely the opposite approach. And I think that the two are pulling at each other, and there's potentially a bit of tension going on between those two around which approach is the most in favour, if you like. So the minister is trying to centralise into the ministry and drive things out of the ministry, whereas the associate minister Seymour is trying to pull things away from the ministry, and take all his money away from the ministry, and so there might be a bit of tension there between those two, so that's always fun when that happens.
Chaos. I thought that was the thing of the campaign.
Shall we see Mike Butterick? Because apparently, from what I've heard, he's in education, everything as a sheep farmer. Except it's more that education apparently is a strong point, I've heard.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak in support of this bill. And isn't it great that on this side of the House we're intent on making sure we lift the outcomes for our young students? And I look at the hard work so far by the incredibly dedicated, focused and passionate Minister of Education, Erica Stanford. The positive feedback from parents has been overwhelming, and I'm thrilled that the spotlight has been put on improved educational outcomes for our young people, because the hopes and dreams of this country in the future rest on their young shoulders. This bill allows for the introduction of charter schools that have the potential to further lift the bar on those aspirations. An appetite for participation, 78 so far, likely counting, shows we're on the right track to getting educational performance back on track. And charter schools are one way, Mr. Speaker, of wanting to lift student achievement and ultimately to help deliver a better economy in the future. We have seen declining student achievement in New Zealand, and this bill will help give teachers greater autonomy to support those underachieving students while having high levels of accountability. Accountability, Mr. Speaker, that's a good thing. And regarding the ECE component of this bill, we're removing the red tape to make it easier to deliver effective, affordable, accessible early learning services to families. And that's in complete contrast to the other side of the House who'd rather spend all their time working out how to relieve hard-working Kiwis of their income with more tax. And this bill also enables rules about collecting, recording and providing attendance data. Simply, we want our kids back at school. I commend this bill to the House.
And also them paying for a toll road for your voters in the Aotearoa district to head to Palmerston North Hospital.
As a leftist living in his area, I love taxing people. It's fun.
I think he should spend less time in Parliament and more time in his own electorate, because I think at the moment he's probably more likely to get voted out.
Put it this way, I know there was a big campaign to de-seat Kira McAnulty, and they were pumping him out like the shining armour, and he's just completely full flat. And I mean, I saw this before this happening, because our experience again with It's in the Ballot with him was just garbage.
With Mike Butterick.
No response. Didn't even think it was important to be on there for one of the biggest general electorates of the North Island that stretches across 3 regional councils and 3 district councils boundaries and still have no sets of traffic lights in it, but a hell of a lot of one-lane bridges.
Did Kieran respond though? Was Kieran all good?
Kieran did go on there. There was a little bit of rockiness in the day of it, and we managed to get him to come in remotely. But Jill went out of her way to get him on there because she was a bit of a screw you to Mike Butterick. She went above trying really hard to get Kieran on there, but she was expressing the point. The fact is, you're in a rural electorate that stretches this far. You've got to actually be seen on there doing this. And this was, and it was evident that with the fact with Mike not being there, it just showed things in there. And Ron Mark and Lawrence Yule gave them shit at a cafe the following day for not being on there.
It's a huge electorate. I mean, it goes all the way from South Wairarapa all the way up to Waipaha, which is massive. Yeah, it's and really diverse too.
Oh, exactly. I mean, far out. I mean, everywhere's different in that electorate. They all have their own unique bubbles. Apparently, Marston, they like trim milk.
Yeah, they do.
Do you like trim milk?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm allergic to cow's milk, so I prefer coconut.
I think I saw a quote on Politic by Richard Harmond, and he was saying that the people who voted for National weren't voting for National because they like National. They were voting for National because they don't like Labour. It's a bit like a rebel vote. So I think
Ramatai electorate was a classic example of that, where a lot of people voted for Julie and Genta because they didn't want to vote for National and they didn't want to vote for Fleur, so they voted for Julie and Genta.
Right. and you saw that in Tamaki as well. You saw that in a lot of electorates this election, actually.
Yeah, like I remember speaking to Auntie Gwen, has lived in Newland in the same place 70 years, grandma's sister. She said, "Oh, my electoral vote wouldn't really matter where it goes. It's going to go to Labour because it's always been Labour. I mean, she had Jonathan Hunt as her MP most of her life. And yeah, it was like when I saw election, I was like, oh heck, Auntie Gwen's not going to be a bit shocked by that result because and yeah, she said it will be her party vote will be the most influential one of which way does it go, and. Yeah. And originally she was looking at national, but her bottom line was live animal exports. So I don't know where her vote ended up going. Yeah. Now, shall we see what Grant McCullen's got to sit there and say? Because apparently he's dodgy. And he believes police are going to knock down his door when you sit there and commit wage theft.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'd like to focus my comments on this bill on the kids. Ultimately, education is there for the children. That's what it's all about. And what really confuses me as to why there is so much opposition to another form of education being provided to our children. Because some children, but not all children, thrive under the same system. Some children thrive in a state school. That's great, but they don't all do that. Some thrive in an integrated school, and that's great, but they don't all do that. Some in a private school, but they don't all thrive there. And some thrive in Māori immersion schools, and that's great as well. Why are they so afraid of? Because ultimately, it's about where the student will get the best education. Charter schools now provide another opportunity for that. And it means that because we just look at our current system, it is not delivering for the students of New Zealand as it should. And in fact, we've heard a lot about the submissions that were made to the Select Committee. And we got a wide range of them. And yes, the majority of them were clearly an orchestrated campaign coming from the unions and the teachers to come along. But there were a couple of very interesting comments I picked up. One was from the University of Otago College of Education. And this beggars belief when it says to me one of their key principles is success at school cannot be reduced to achievement in literacy and numeracy. Just think about that. So ultimately, it's not their main focus. And then actually, another submitter said the same thing. The Aotearoa Educators Collective said the same thing, that success at school cannot be reduced to achievement in literacy and numeracy. No wonder some of our students are struggling so much. But what I would like to highlight is actually, and I think I've mentioned this before, is that there's some people with some great foresight on the other side of the House. And they made some great comments, actually. And one of them's in the House tonight, this morning, I should say. And one of the great quotes is, the charter school model presented an opportunity for us to work with whānau and switch them onto learning. We provided a wraparound solution to re-engage Māori parents and their children into learning. That was the Honourable Willie Jackson. The Honourable Willie Jackson. And actually, he received great support. I have here a headline, Labor MP backs Jackson on charter schools. And his quote was, the bottom line is, why would you stop something that's working? And to the Honourable Penny Hanare, I thank you very much for your support. And on that note, I'd like to say, I look forward to this bill being introduced and I commend it to the House.
Does Grant McCullen not actually know that it's a third reading? Like, yeah, I look forward to this bill being introduced to the House.
It's not reading, bro.
Go to law and get royal assent.
How long has he been in the Parliament? Like, has he not been doing his homework to understand?
Well, I mean, you can't. Remember his speech on the wage theft? Was it wage theft? Abraham's bill.
Yeah.
And he just basically we can't have the police turning up to houses because being falsely accused of not paying wages.
He doesn't read.
No,
he reads too much. He's looking solely at a script. He doesn't update what's the script says.
Oh, true. He reads his Facebook posts.
But you notice David McLeod is back in the House.
Was Willie Jackson in the House that day, or was he lucky?
He doesn't have a speech in here.
Oh, he's lucky then. He summoned him.
He said his name 3 times, he would have popped up behind him.
Yeah, that's what SNL would do if they were doing an impersonation of this show. They would actually have Willie Jackson. From that, they would have Willie Jackson suddenly pop up behind there in their skits.
So, okay, let's talk about charter schools. Would the left wing support charter schools? Yeah, probably if they were cheaper per student and teachers
delivered good results.
Yeah, I think that's the main issue here is the money and the qualifications.
Yeah,
I think the big issue with charter schools I have is that it's not transparent. There's very little of accountability you can have there, right? I'm probably the most supportive of charter schools out of everyone on this panel here.
But you agree with the word accountability.
I think there needs to be some sort of system where if a charter school doesn't provide results, doesn't provide outcomes, there needs to be something there to stop that from happening.
Because it's called a commissioner. I mean, hey, I remember when Nainai College had a commissioner put in, and then they sat down there and was it headhunted the principal of Kapiti College to take over as the principal of Nainai College.
It's because I think what you saw with the Labour government when they got in 2017, there was a lot of contracts that were going to end up, and there would have been, I think it's called zombie schools or ghost schools, where the school itself doesn't have a sponsor, and therefore kids are left in limbo.
Yep.
So I think there needs to be a system in place there where kids are not left in limbo, and kids actually have the ability to get an education, even if a private sponsor doesn't, or no longer has the funds, or just doesn't want to sponsor the school anymore.
Or leave it because it's not profitable enough.
Yeah.
This is where Nick comes in, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jan has been pretty clear that Labor will change the chart. We'll go back to public schools if a school goes into a charter school. Where I think the detail around that is yet to be worked out, because if there are a lot of charter schools that are in place and contracts are in place, that's where the detail needs to be worked out, and I think that's where some of the detail is being worked through at the moment. So I definitely don't want to get ahead of that at the moment. But ultimately, I mean, the point raised earlier around the kids are the most important thing in the consideration. That will be one of the most important considerations, to make sure that the kids' education is not compromised in any way.
Yeah.
David,
Go ahead.
David Seymour has gone on record saying he wants the contracts to be 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. So it's a 30-year contract, and every 10 years there's a break in something.
He's making P-Tom's sister look like, what do you call it, a joke in comparison, because they were 9 years for 2 3-year renewals.
Yeah. He's trying to make charter schools actually permanent and fundamental within our education.
No, he'll be doing that so that there can be funding security that they can privately borrow from it. Because that was one of the things with P-Tom with public transport, was the 9-year contract was the contract that you could have as a security to say to the bank, can I please borrow $250,000 to sit down there and buy a bunch of buses? And having, say, a 9-year contract was able to get done, because that was an issue with buses, was old buses running on there, because the regional councils were still running 12-month contracts on many of their services. And so P-Tom forced them to 9-year contracts, which actually gave the bus companies the ability to actually borrow to buy brand new buses. But yeah, that's probably why he wants 10-year contracts as well. It won't just be that, but it's also trying to say it will survive free governments.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but that could be the other aspect behind it. Yeah. Oh, let's shift to the sentencing reform bill now, and let's hear what Goldie has to sit there and say for the first one. Thank you, Willie Jackson, for giving him that title.
Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Mr. Speaker, I present a legislative statement on the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website. Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Madam Speaker, I move that the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill be now read a first time. And I nominate the Justice Committee to consider the bill. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that the bill be reported to the House by the 13th of February 2025. In recent years, we have seen a reduction in the use of imprisonment, despite the increasing seriousness of offending coming before the courts. For example, the imprisonment rate for burglary offences with a maximum penalty of 10 years reduced from 50% in 2016 to 39% in 2022. The imprisonment rate for robbery with a 14-year penalty dropped from 74% to 58%. Public confidence in the ability of our sentencing system to deter and denounce offending has diminished, and this can't continue, Mr. Speaker. The Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill has 3 objectives: to ensure real consequences for crime first, secondly, to restore the principle of personal responsibility for offending, and thirdly, better recognising the needs of victims, particularly those who have suffered through years of increased retail crime. Mr. Speaker, the main features of the bill include, must make it clear from the outset that there will be real consequences for crime. I've become increasingly aware that the public frustration that all too often penalties do not reflect the seriousness of offending and the harm it inflicts on victims and on our communities. It's an established feature of sentencing regimes that offenders can receive discounts on their sentences for personal mitigating factors, such as previous good character. And while this in itself is not an issue, I'm concerned that over time offenders have grown to expect very sizable discounts. In some cases, these can be up to 70%, which can mean the difference between a lengthy sentence of imprisonment and a sentence of home detention. Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill will put an end to this practice by capping the sentence discount at 40%. On current estimates, around 20% of cases involve discounts that exceed this cap, so I expect this policy will have a significant and measurable impact on sentencing outcome. I recognise there will be exceptional circumstances in which a larger discount may be justified, for example, when an offender provides substantial assistance to the authorities. For this reason, the bill provides a limited judicial discretion to guard against the risk of manifestly unjust sentences. The bill also clamps down on discounts for remorse and youth. All too often, offenders have been coming before the courts, each time claiming to have learnt their lesson. This rings hollow, Mr. Speaker, for their victims who don't find it as easy to move on past the trauma and the loss that they have experienced. It's particularly frustrating to many when discounts for youth extend well into the mid-20s. We're not talking about under 18-year-olds. They're treated differently in the youth court. The law changes I'm seeking to relate to New Zealanders who are over 18 for whom repeat youth discounts are harder to justify. The bill's focus on holding offenders to account also extends to unduly generous discounts for guilty pleas, especially those entered late in the day. When offenders drag out the court processes unnecessarily, they waste available court resources and add to the stress and anxiety that victims already experience. That's why I'm proposing a sliding scale for early guilty pleas that caps maximum discounts at 25% while diminishing benefits for offenders who enter guilty pleas later in the process, despite having an early opportunity to do so. It's an approach that's been adopted successfully elsewhere. I'm therefore confident it will be effective in ensuring appropriate discounts are applied without coercing guilty pleas. These sentencing reforms represent a decisive response to crime trends that are of particular concern, notably the alarming growth of retail crime. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their homes, but we've seen an increased victimisation in retail locations, which have more than doubled since 2018. We're all aware of the scourge of ram raids and other robberies that have hit small businesses hard, and the senseless acts of violence against bus drivers and other vulnerable workers. For this reason, the bill introduces several aggravating factors that are intended to result in tougher sentences for offenders who target, first, victims working alone; second, people who work in a business connected to their homes, such as dairy owners who live upstairs; and thirdly, public transport workers. The sentencing package reform also rationalises aggravating factors included in other legislation currently before the House, particularly in two scenarios. The first involves adults who take advantage of children and young people by encouraging them to participate in their offending. This highly irresponsible and selfish behaviour needs to be condemned in the strongest terms, not the least because it helps create a new generation of offenders. Second, I'm concerned about the phenomenon of people live streaming or posting their offending online as a means of glorifying criminal conduct and encouraging copycats. Both of these aggravating factors have been carried over from the ram raid offending and related measures bill, currently at Select Committee. These victim-oriented reforms are also supported by the revision to the principles of the sentencing, which gives greater weight to the needs of victims, Mr. Speaker. Another element of the bill responds to the growing use of concurrent sentencing for offenders who commit further crimes while on bail, in custody and on parole. Victims are right to be concerned if the punishment for crimes committed in these contexts is simply rolled into the sentencing for the original offending. This has been a particular issue for correction officers who work in very challenging conditions, assaulted by prisoners, and find that the penalties don't reflect the crime. That's why we're changing the law to set a clear expectation that cumulative sentences will generally be imposed for offending on bail, in custody and parole, unless there is good reason. The bill also makes minor changes to the Sentencing Act to improve the efficiency and workability of the legislation, for example, making a protection order an option in sentencing where a person has been discharged without conviction for a family violence offence. We know that the proposed reforms to the Sentencing Act will result in more offenders going to prison, and we make no apology for that, Mr. Speaker. Modelling suggests the prison population will increase by about 1,500 extra prisoners over the next 10 years. We plan for this. Much of the costs have already been factored into prison population forecasts. Mr. Speaker, the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill has a 3-month commencement period before the reform comes into force to allow time for everybody to prepare to make the changes. This bill builds on this government's ongoing work to restore law and order, including new laws to address gang harm, which was passed just this week, and reinstating the 3 strikes regime. Mr. Speaker, the Sentencing Amendment Bill strikes the right balance between ensuring real consequences for crime and maintaining judicial discretion to avoid unjust outcomes. I commend this bill to the House.
He talks too much.
So I wonder, does that make... So one of the factors of our laws is you've got, at the point of trial, the laws have to be based... so to be tried on has to be based on the law of what it was at the time of the offence. With the March 15th Christchurch killer, people were signing petitions to reinstate the death penalty, even that they wouldn't have been able to actually have him charged and sentenced to death because the death penalty wasn't a case when he live streamed his crime. And his lawyers would be successful if they tried to retroactively add the law. I would mention about the Texas BTK, where they did not give the death penalty to BTK because he committed the crimes at the point when the death penalty was not law, before it got reenacted by citizens' referendum. But when it comes to sentencing, does that mean it applies to at the point of when the crime's committed, or at the point when you get sentenced? Because that would be quite interesting. At which point does that get done? Especially if the courts are slowing you down, or if the prosecution slows you down, should you be punished for someone else slowing you down in the system? Or is that where it's exceptional circumstances meant to kick in? That's my 2 cents worth. Everyone else want to put in your 2 cents worth?
I want to know how restorative justice fits into this equation.
I don't think it does.
No. I don't have much commentary on this one because admittedly I was too busy studying to become a chemical engineer. But yeah, I mean, I would like to see more spoken about when it comes to restorative justice, because I think preventing crime is more productive for society than throwing everyone into prison. He seems really excited about that fact. That's a bit concerning.
There's a balance that needs to be had, right? Because of course you need to prevent the crime in the first place, but what about when the crime is committed? And you need to throw someone in prison when that crime is committed. I just think the issue with this bill is that, from what I looked up, there was literally no experts at all who were supporting this. I couldn't find a single expert from the left or the right who supported this bill whatsoever. It has no support other than the coalition agreement between, I think it was New Zealand First and National. I can't quite remember, but it was between them.
That's becoming a common trend.
Yeah. A lot of these controversial bills are just the coalition agreements.
Yeah.
And their entire argument is that it's a coalition agreement.
Yeah, I mean, like the one about the public transport, yeah, it sounds all great, but the person who is about to whack someone, if they whack a bus passenger on the bus instead of the bus driver, does that mean the sentence is different? You know, is it difference between whether you whack a train manager or, for us oldies out there, a train guard versus, say, a member of public on the train? Like, you know, what is going to be the difference in there on that particular aspect? Does a off-duty Transdev employee taking a ride home have different protection versus the on-duty Transdev employee who's sitting down there opening and shutting the doors on the train?
Good question.
Yeah, I think with this one, not an awful lot to say on this one, but I think potentially some of the reorientation into focusing on the victims of crime, that could be potentially quite positive for in terms of allowing victims of crime to have a greater voice through the justice system, because I certainly know at the moment there isn't a great enough ability for victims to have a voice and participation through the justice system. It's certainly a very cold process, and victims don't have much of an ability to have their voice heard through that process. But it was pretty clear from Goldsmith's comments that this is about putting more people into jail. And I think ultimately, if your answer to in terms of justice policy is to put more people into jail, I think you need to re-look at the way that you're thinking about justice policy, because it's never going to solve justice. It's never going to solve criminal offending if you're just going to lock up more people, because ultimately building prisons is, and I'm going to quote Bill English here, and I thought that I would never do that, because ultimately that's never the start to a good outcome. But Bill English, I mean, he said it. Prisons are a moral and fiscal failure, and you know, if you're building prisons, that's never a good place to be in. And
actually, building a prison can actually cause a lot of problems when it comes to representation reviews for some councils. It is part of the reason why Upper Hutt City Council gave up on having Māori wards with the referendum, because they already had an issue with the representation review for proportional representation, because the fact that the military base and the prison were across the road from each other. And in the case, so whoever represented that ward effectively would have had a lower bar to get over the line versus other areas of the city.
Interesting.
So that was something, for the people who had an Upper Hutt City Council, they had an issue in there because 4% of the population are prisoners. And 4% of the population sits there and plays with a representational count when it comes to voting. The same would also apply for, I think it's Te Awamutu or Aotearoa District Council, where a good portion of the population are prisoners. Same with West Spring Hill Correctional Facility. You know, And also, once they've been in jail if they're sentenced to 3 years or longer, they get struck off the electoral roll, but the population has to still be counted in proportional representation. But hey, that could also change. They might make it that you get sentenced to prison for 1 day, you get struck off the electoral roll, which the Electoral Commission absolutely hated when that was in place in law from 2010 to 2019.
I've always believed that the purpose of prison should be a place where people can rehabilitate, but also to keep members of the public safe. Not necessarily a place of punishment, but a place of where justice and where other things like research can be conducted on how to rehabilitate people. It kind of disturbs me how we go back to this idea of we need to send them to this place for long-term punishment and then we'll release them back out again. And it's like, well,
yeah, but I mean, some people sit there and believe in collective punishment. Look at how many people sit there and go, oh, one cyclist was a bad driver, so I'm going to punishment pass every single one of them. I hope I don't knock them off in the process. Oh, and if I knock them off, that's I should be immune from prosecution because I'm a king.
Yep.
I've always wondered, though, is it possible that people cannot be rehabilitated? And if that is the case, what do you do then? Like,
yes, but you've actually got to prove the point, is that person beyond rehabilitation?
Once you reach that point.
Yeah, I do believe that. I mean, that's what the sentence called preventative detention was for. That is a sentence for like the beast of Blenheim, which is actually the reason why that sentence came into place for sexual offending was because of the beast of Blenheim, and he was proven as an example of why that sentence needed to be in at the point he committed his crimes.
Yeah, I mean, some people need to stay in prison. I'm not going to deny that, but it's about.
So that's why you have parole boards. That's why you have, that's why you have systems in place in there. That's why you have parole. I know 2 parole board. Actually, no, I know 3 people who do parole board prison stuff, and it's a very important function of the system. Is going through there, and that's where you work out these things during parole. Are they being a model prisoner or are they being a delinquent? That sort of thing there. And that's the whole point of, the parole part. Because while you got someone on parole, you can continue monitoring them for the rest of their sentence. If they serve the maximum of their sentence, they're straight out the door. They can commit crimes, and there's nothing you can do, such as breach of parole. That's the worst outcome. Parole means you can keep the checks and balances on there. People who get paroled are less likely to reoffend than those who sit there and serve near the maximum of their prison sentence.
I'd love to see more parole officers.
These are parole board
services. It's not going to happen.
These ones are parole board members that decide who gets released. Should we kick off with? Shall we see what Cameron Luxton's got to say from ACT?
Yeah.
Sure.
Another Luxton.
It's been a long time coming. As someone who went around, and I'm sure many in this house did, during the election campaign and before, talking to businesses who had suffered at the hands of crime, I'm sure many of you can empathise and understand what I am about to say. Victims' needs have not been put first. Businesses, people who are going about their honest daily lives have felt like they were getting classed as second fiddle to the criminals. That last government that was unceremoniously turfed out last year had it coming. And one of the things that was coming to them was the increase in crime that we were seeing in New Zealand. Victims' needs need to be first. And I'm proud to stand and speak on behalf of this bill, which will do just that. Mr. Speaker, there are going to be some changes. One will be, and I would like to relay a story of going to a small store owner in the Bay of Plenty who had just suffered their second ram raid. And now I'm no detective, I'm no sleuth, but I asked this victimised shop owner, what did you see beforehand? Did you see anything coming? And this shop owner told me, we saw some adults that we thought were pretty sketchy coming in and sussing out our shop in the days ahead of that ram raid. And sure, we thought something was going on. They were bringing kids who probably should have been in school, but weren't, because also truancy was a massive problem in the last government. They were bringing kids along, and then, sure enough, we have a whole lot of kids who probably should have been at school committing a ram raid. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are adding a clause to the Sentencing Act to make sure that an adult offender can be convicted as a party to an offence committed by a child or young person when there is some encouragement there. There's other things around live streaming, and we've seen the abhorrent images, I think, of the Papamoa Plaza, which had a rather famous, and I almost don't want to draw attention to it, but ram raiding incident with some delinquents charging through the centre of a shopping centre and causing hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage. And then these Muppets decided they were going to post that image along with the bounty which they'd achieved from a small skate shop, and it would have equalled 1/100th of the value of the damage which they did to that store. Mr. Speaker, we've seen abhorrent scenes on our public transport in this country, where people who are going about a job of providing a service to the good people of Auckland, wanting to get places, have been assaulted on public transport. Well, I'm glad to say we're adding a clause that makes public transport passenger service workers a it would create an aggravating effect if you were to take some criminal activity out on those good people. And then, Mr. Speaker, the final thing I would like to speak about is a policy which, I was very proud ACT was championing in the election campaign, and this government, as part of the ACT National Coalition, is now putting this into practice. And this is sole charge workers. People who are often left alone working and can feel extremely vulnerable behind a counter with people coming in and out. This needs to be an aggravating factor when someone is taking a criminal act upon these good people. Also, people who are working from a home, from a business which is connected to a home. Now, I'm going to relay a little story. Over the weekend, I have a small business attached to my home. Now, some little thug came along and kicked out the place where an honesty box once lived. Took this honesty box, which is the business run by my small children, and took off with it. Now, I have to say I was really disappointed, but this clown decided to have some distinctive tattoos showing on a video camera, so I hope that assists police in the Bay of Plenty in piecing together this delinquent's behaviour. But just to reiterate, I didn't feel overly threatened in my home, but I've got small kids, Mr. Speaker, and this is a home where we live, and we have a business near it. I do not think that the things that they were exposed to should be exposed to anybody. And people who think about their parents, young children, when they're thinking about their kids, working sole charge in a business connected to their home, I hope, Mr. Speaker, that this change makes those families feel a little bit safer tonight. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Yeah, I just want to talk about that because I've encountered crime in my own community, right? I've had people try to steal stuff from my household. And you know what came to my mind? I feel really bad for these people. The fact that they have to come to my place and steal my shit. Are they dealing with poverty? That was the first thing that came to my mind. The idea of punishment didn't really occur to me as a first thought. It's disappointing to see that the ACT Party and other members are just they're not interested in looking at the idea of poverty plus proximity equals crime.
He seems really bitter. I don't know, I get that vibe.
Something I'd like to sit there and say is maybe we could do this at Select Committee. Now anyone knows me knows I have a lovely war against wins. I would sit there and say I would like it. Should say if someone went in for social security help and got declined, should that case manager be held as an accessory potentially? Should that be looked at as a factor? There are some situations where case managers outright do that and then they end up with that. This is a flow-on effect. Say someone who was rightfully entitled to something, like a food grant, who got declined because, maybe they got told to hand over 12 months worth of bank statements that breached the Privacy Act, and then they've gone in and committed a crime to steal a loaf of bread, or as Fat Tony of The Simpsons would say, cigarettes. Should that person be looked at as a potential accessory, as an enabler to cause that crime to potentially occur? As that sort of thing should sit there and be looked at. Because, we talk about accountability. Well, accountability, they talk about having adults sitting down there being held accountable for scoping out the place and telling the kids what to do to be charged. That can drag on actually quite a fair bit. I've got a very quiet panel.
Thinking.
I think I've got a few numbers here about the amount of people that could be introduced into the prison system. And it's around 1,350 people. More people will be put into the prison system with the a new bill being passed. And what they're going to do is completely eliminate for sentence reductions. They're not going to use youth or mental illness or remorse for significant sentence reductions, and it will lead to longer sentences for individuals who may be more vulnerable. And it's just and then 1,350 is a very conservative estimate. It isn't the maximum; it is a very low number. And they say that by reducing the 40%. There was a 40% cap on prisoners, right, under the Labour government. Yeah, by removing that, that'll introduce 1,350 more people into the prison system, and that's not accounting for them removing the youth, mental illness, and remorse factors that were going into sentence reduction.
How many people are potentially going to be put on remand as well? Considering about a third of our prison population is on remand, so they're not even been sentenced yet. They're awaiting their day in court.
Oh yeah, it'll clog up the. I couldn't there was something about we'll clog up the courts, and reducing sentence incentives will make more guilty pleas, could mean more guilty pleas, and push defendants to opt for trials, and therefore clog up the courts and delay justice for all parties on all sides of the.
Especially if you're in a situation of where, no, we've got to throw the book at you. Actually, a great example, not New Zealand related, but Hunter Biden. That was a great example of where there was this big sweetheart deal. The Republicans tanked it though, but effectively now they're throwing the book at him like crazy as a result because of how long it's dragged out through the court system of this whole process. But yeah, he was given a pretty sweetheart deal that wouldn't have ended up in there. But yeah, the Republicans screwed it up. But that's like a classic example of like, well, what happens if, say, you have a deal and suddenly the deal's taken off the table, and so, if that's the case, I'll try it in court.
I mean, at the moment, our justice system is pretty clogged up, and I mean, I think that point was raised earlier. I mean, I think it's around about 3 years to get into the High Court for a trial. And it just takes a really long time because there's so many cases are backlogged in the district court. So adding extra processes, adding extra layers of complexity into the system will just mean that people will sit in prison without having been charged for even longer. And I mean, that's ultimately not good when people could actually be outside of prison, contributing to society,
or actually being rehabilitated. Because if you're on remand, you're not eligible to anything.
Yep. Well, exactly. They could be outside of prison, being in employment, paying taxes, doing, being a member of society, rather than the other alternative, which is sitting in prison and doing not a heck of a lot. So it's a choice that the government is making around actually, denying people the opportunity to be, relatively productive and members of society, in order to prove a point around justice, or just prove a point around locking people up in order to look tough. And I just can't really see the point, to be honest.
There was a beautiful piece by Laura Walters on Newsroom about how Muldoon. I have a lot of problems with Muldoon, but he got it right in terms of with gangs and a lot of people going into prison. He sent them to work rather than necessarily just. I think it was a quote from someone under the Bolger government, might have been Bolger himself, where you just throw away the key and put them in the prison. And I think even to some extent in the 80s, under the neoliberal Rogernomics, even Richard Pebble said, look, there needs to be some form of work that makes people who commit crimes reintegrate into society. There was a difference between who should do it, whether it be private or public, but there was an overall consensus at that time that people should be able to be put to work, so therefore they can be part of a community again, rather than you isolating them and overall making them feel even more disconnected from society than they already do.
Exactly, yeah. And on what Dave X's comment is in there, and especially if they were to get sentenced to a prison sentence of 3 years or longer, but if they spent 3 years on remand, they lose their right to vote and could walk out the door. As that used to happen under the old system of, you're held on remand, but you have a right to vote, you've been sentenced to prison as time served, you got struck off the electoral roll, your leader got sent to the prison, your prison leader, say you got struck off roll, it's sent returned to sender. Yeah. Shall we see what Ginny Anderson has got to say on the sentencing bill?
Yep.
Oh, wrong screen. That's the one I want.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to take a call on this bill. And those measures that member just mentioned, which is the children being involved in crime and also the posting on social media, are great ideas because they were part of policy announced by Labor during the election, which were copied by that party opposite. So that's great. We're in agreement on some of the things in this bill because there's other things that we're not in agreement on. And I was listening to the great Catherine Ryan on Radio New Zealand earlier in the week, and she was interviewing a former district court judge, it was Judge Harvey, and it was a really interesting conversation because they were specifically talking about the changes that Minister Goldsmith has brought to this House. And and the likely impacts that they will have. And the point was made quite clearly that a lot of the provisions in this bill already exist at the discretion of judges. So it's spelling out quite clearly what is already actually able to be done. He did raise, though, a fair point. He did raise a point that has been discussed before, and that's the kind of sort of semi-war that this government has waged upon the judiciary in terms of trying to curtail what is their usual sphere. And so I'd like to just refer to paragraph 22 of the regulatory impact statement, because it's quite thorough. The Ministry of Justice have been doing a great job at pulling these together in short times, I understand. So paragraph 22, in the short amount of consultation they were able to undertake on this, they say that stakeholders have advised that the limitations on judicial discretion included in the proposed changes create the potential for unintended consequences. Unintended consequences. These risks include legal challenges on procedural grounds for breaches of New Zealand Bill of Rights. So that's additional money potentially that will have to be in that space if there's additional legal challenges to the Crown and courts. These risks include, a prescriptive approach can drive court delays as sentencing becomes increasingly complex and can drive the potential for later guilty pleas, which would be the antithesis of one of the measures in this bill, which in turn may lead to an increase in the prison remand populations. Officials therefore consider it important that appropriate levels of judicial discretion are maintained across the various proposed amendments in the Reform Bill. And that was some of the similar points that Judge Harvey was making when I listened to him on Radio New Zealand, that there are unintended consequences. So some of these things make the shop front look pretty tidy and make it look like things are being tough. But we will see down the line how these play out in reality. And the concern is what is already a very congested court system can be made far more difficult. And that's no doubt why they might, the next bill will be wanting an additional judge to churn through some more of these things that will be happening in the space. Mr. Speaker, the 40% cap on sentence discounts does severely restrict judges' ability to consider the full range of mitigating factors in complex cases. And for those ones where a rehabilitative pathway might stop that person coming back and creating more victims in the system, that's a real loss. Because if there's an ability to find a pathway that prevents further victimisation, it would have been good to have legislation that enables that. But already with the removal of funding for cultural reports or looking into the reasons of underpinning offending, this removes even further ability for judges to understand the drivers of crime, to understand what is underpinning the reason why an offender has come to the court in order to attempt to prevent victimisations happening again and again and again. And that's why I do question whether reducing victims and being concerned about victims' rights is actually at the heart of this government's desire or not. Because much of the advice I've seen in this report actually talks about some of the lack of ability to be able to provide for victims. And the Ministry of Justice actually prefers retaining the status quo when the government's told them to commit to prioritise victims because there are already provisions in the Act. So once again, their own officials are telling them that their window dressing is already in place, but they still want to push ahead and talk about doing it anyway, because this is a government that is all talk, all shop front, but there's nothing going on to actually drive and reduce reoffending in New Zealand.
Yep.
Jenny's right.
I really like Jenny Anderson. She made a one big blunder when it came to the numbers, but she's very, very good at what she does, and I think people are a little bit too harsh on her when she made that mistake.
I did say all those stats are misleading, but no, Jenny is right here.
On this one she is right. Yes, yeah. Should we kick over to the district court judge bill? What the hell's happened here? Just a moment while I go and actually check to see. District Court Judge Amendment Bill. It's weird. It kicks off with. It's like it's missing some of the speeches, and primarily because it's a first reading bill, I would sit there and say you want the. I found out what's happened. It's on the previous bill. Okay. I know how to fix it. We've got it working. Because whenever we have first readings, we want the minister to explain what's happening. Oh, yeah. Okay.
District Court Judges Amendment Bill, being now read a first time, and I nominate the Justice Committee to consider the bill. At the appropriate time, I intend to move the bill be reported to the House by the 13th of February, 2025. Now, we're doing this as a separate bill. It should have been part of the previous bill, but the opposition didn't agree to put them together, but that's by the by. The District Court is the busiest court in New Zealand. It's the largest court in Australasia. There are over 200,000 new cases in application on District Court each year. Most District Court cases are criminal cases. Over the past 5 years, there have been fewer cases coming to the court, but more effort from the court needed to dispose of cases. The time it's taken to get cases through the court is increasing. Delays have had a negative social impact on defendants, complainants, and on other court participants, affecting access to justice and how quickly people can move on with their lives. The bill will amend the District Court Act 2016 to increase the statutory maximum number of District Court judges by 1, an increase from 182 to 183 full-time equivalent judges. The bill makes 2 consequential amendments to the District Court Act. Section 12(1) replaces 182 with 183. To reflect the judicial cap. Section 12(2)(c) states that the aggregate number, for example, 181.5, must not exceed the maximum number of judges that is for the time being permitted. This bill replaces 181.5 with
182.5. Statutory cap on the District Court judges includes Youth Court judges and Family Court judges as the Youth Court and Family Court are divisions of the District Court. The statutory cap was last amended in 2019. Since then, judges have been appointed, bringing the total number of full-time judges to at or near the statutory maximum. The increase in the statutory cap will ensure that the District Court is equipped to implement the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill, currently being considered by this House. I expect that the sentencing reforms, as well as the other criminal justice reforms, will increase pressure on the court. This bill comes into force the day after royal assent. And, Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
I don't think that number goes far enough. And he actually clarified some information I was unsure of, like, does that include youth court? Does that include family court? What does it do? I don't think, as a country, 183 judges, full-time equivalent judges, is actually enough for our system to cope. I think the number needs to possibly go quite substantially up. And maybe we should put in submissions that actually ask for it to be substantially increased to, say, possibly 200 full-time equivalent positions or 225.
Get more community lawyers too while we're at it.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with that around community law. I mean, our community law funding is just woefully inadequate. I've got some very good friends who work in that space, and I mean that the uplift in fees for community lawyers it was looked at a few years ago, but I mean it couldn't be. It needs to be increased because the amount of work they do is phenomenal, and the amount of money they get paid is woeful.
I mean, many of them are doing it as volunteers, or that section of it.
Yeah, pretty much.
No, I remember the one that gave us our legal definition for it. It's in the ballot on COVID tests before the show of what to do and what we can and what we can't do. Because we're hoping to get to, of course, you agree. And she goes, morally, I agree with what you're doing. Legally, I can't say that. And it was the questions of, like, do we have expanded seating arrangements, that sort of thing there. Because our aim was, what we were looking at was to push those who didn't want to do a COVID test to not spread the COVID around to possibly come in remotely. But we got told, but that wasn't going to happen because those types of candidates were also the ones like, no, I'm coming in person. COVID's fake, sort of thing there. So that was something in there. And that's part of the reason why we had the individual mics approach, which was partly to stop, because passing the mic around was passing the COVID around. And funny enough, we did not have any cases of our shows being linked to COVID outbreaks.
Oh, right. Nice.
Yeah, it just shows what sort of steps have been taken. I do know the last show, Stacey and Ray got it. We think we know who it's from, but that was right on the last show. Yeah, but I still can't figure out how Andre and I managed to avoid it. That's why I still.
I haven't had COVID yet either. So
I've never had COVID myself.
Yeah. No. I've had more issues from having the vaccine than actually having COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm touching COVID like Neo in the Matrix.
My entire family have got it, but I was on holiday when they had COVID. So.
Oh no, I've had COVID twice in houses I've lived at and managed to avoid it.
Damn.
Yeah, no, that's the part that people would tell me, "Oh, just get COVID, go away," and sit like this, and just get over and done with. And I'm like, I'm on day 6 now. Do you think I want another 7 days cooped up at home? Yeah, and that was partly, and it was because of what happened with the COVID outbreak in the house was how do we prevent it from spreading outside the house because of the communities we're going into. Oh, okay, so on the second speech, should we hear from the, was it no, we actually have to go back that one. Should we hear from Duncan Webb?
Yep. From the Minister then was that this sentencing bill that we've just seen go through first reading will increase pressure on the judicial and justice system generally. In fact, if we go back and look at the regulatory impact statement for that bill, you'll see that the projected costs over 10 years are $150 million. Now, the government has recognised that there is a significant backlog in the courts, and their solution to that is to appoint one more judge and give the whole system a whole lot more work. And I couldn't help recognise the slight tinge of bitterness in the minister's tone, but he's got to learn to do things right, because he did want to cobble these two bills together and have them go through this House as one, But I want this bill, to be honest, we're supporting it, we get it. We don't want longer times for people on remand or victims waiting to see what's happening with their trial. But we don't want that to cloud the examination of the sentencing bill. And the fact of the matter is that the sentencing bill places some quite significant burdens on the district court. And we heard, one of the reasons we need this judge is we heard that in terms of the sentencing bill, the courts will have to keep a record.
Whoa.
What happened there?
I think this is what happens when Parliament has little balls ups in the way they do things. Let's see if it continues on from hopefully
judge and give the whole system a whole lot more work. And I couldn't help recognise the slight tinge of bitterness in the minister's tone, but he's got to learn to do things right, because he did want to cobble these two bills together and have them go through this House as one. But I want this bill, to be honest, we're supporting it, we get it. We don't want longer times for people on remand or victims waiting to see what's happening with their trial. But we don't want that to cloud the examination of the sentencing bill. And the fact of the matter is that the sentencing bill places some quite significant burdens on the district court. And we heard, one of the reasons we need this judge is we heard that in terms of the sentencing bill, the courts will have to keep a record of discounts or whatever, reductions, mitigations for youth and for remorse. Now, someone in the Ministry of Justice is probably just, scratching their head if they know how the justice system works, because keeping it on the permanent record actually is no more than writing it on a bit of paper. And the members of the Justice Committee who attended the last meeting will know, because we had good discussion with the Chief Executive of Justice, Secretary for Justice, that a file is it's just that. It's a paper file. There is no centrally kept permanent record. So I don't know how the courts are going to look and find to make sure that someone doesn't get 2 youth discounts or 2 remorse discounts or whatever it might be. And that is actually going to create more workload, not just for one more judge, but for registry staff as well. Now, what we need is the digitisation project to be completed, and that's where the energy of that government should be, rather than distracting ministry officials to sentencing frameworks which, by their own riz, they say is worse than the status quo, and where they say there are much better and more effective interventions to make better sentencing decisions. But rather than that, we've got $150 million of costs to the justice system overall over 10 years. We've got a need for another judge, and I suspect it will be more than that over time. And we've got a whole new administrative system to keep tabs on how many discounts for remorse or youth offending there's been. So that minister needs to work out where his energies should go, because he's complaining about decisions of the Business Committee, but he's the minister who goes to Business Committee time and again and asks for extensions of time, because his ministry can't keep up, or he hasn't quite worked out what he's going to do yet. So the fact of the matter is that this bill, it's a small bill. Another judge isn't a matter of high importance. We support it, but we support it not because the reforms of this government are good, but we support it because we think that people engaged in the justice system, from victims to offenders, accused, whether they're innocent or guilty, deserve to have an effective and timely system. And we will be watching very closely to see whether that is what the government delivers, because we have serious concerns about that and suspect that they're far and away not going to achieve that, because the Taureka program, the real solution to this, is running into a few hurdles, as we heard the other day. That's where the energy should be going, not on worthless amendments such as these.
I think he makes the point. Is the number actually... Is one judge enough? And maybe we should be putting our money into, say, more registrars?
What's the judge to case ratio?
Yeah.
Story around this one. When Duncan actually taught me law way back in the dark old ages, but the story that this one brings to my mind is when I did a clerkship overseas quite a few years ago, in 2001, the law office I was working at, we used to have to go down to the High Court to argue cases. And mind you, this is in 2001. Before we left the law office, we would submit documents electronically. They would all go into they would all be like, what's the word for it? Scanned into the court for all the cases that we were going through. And then we'd go down to court and sit in front of monitors like everyone sits in front of. And then the judge would come in, sit in front of a monitor, and then everyone would see the material that we were working in front of. we literally couldn't see the judge because the judge was sitting behind a monitor. It was quite freaky. And this was 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago now. So this is what they're talking. This is what Duncan was talking about when he was talking about the electronic transformation project that the courts are trying to get through. Because at the moment, when you go to court, everything is paper, literally. And it's quite astonishing that we're still dealing with paper down at the court.
We can get cameras in courts and we can have audio-visual links, but we're still doing things by paper.
So I think Duncan's point is really quite on point, that actually we should be focusing on digitizing our courts, and that's where we get much more efficiency rather than putting one more judge in to paper over the cracks. And maybe they're running into trouble around that project where they should be actually focusing on, digitizing the courts. And that's what makes me laugh, because other countries around the world are, 20 years ahead of us.
So we are behind.
It just makes you laugh. And if you don't laugh, you'll probably cry. But,
you're crying and laughing at the same time.
At the same time, yeah.
Okay, let's see how how these free speeches go back to back, because they look like they're less than a minute apart.
A short contribution on the District Court Judges Amendment Bill. It looks like the Justice Committee's picked up a couple of jobs tonight. I went away out of the House for a few moments, and I think we've had the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill referred to us, and I want to thank my colleague Cameron Luxton for stepping in and doing a speech on that. ACT will, of course, be supporting this because this bill goes hand in hand with the Sentencing Reform Bill by increasing the number of District Court judges to 183, and so that will be needed to deal with the changes we are making. I did wonder whether Dr. Duncan Webb actually wanted these bills split just so he could give 2 speeches, but I know he will be a diligent member of the Select Committee when these bills come before it, and so we look forward to scrutinising this very short bill, which again just adds an extra judge, and I commend it to the House. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of New Zealand First in support of the District Court Judges Amendment Bill, which is addressing a very obvious need in our judicial system, and I have great delight in commending the bill to the House.
Maramino Kapakingi.
Kia ora, Mr. Speaker. Kia ora tātou te whare. Well, it might start being a brief contribution, might end up being a very long one, but here we go. Small bill, big impact. It's a slippery slope, and I get the pragmatics of getting 182 to 83 and 183, and it might sound like it sounds okay, it sounds pretty harmless. But what I want to talk to in that regard is that to make room more judges simply means for Māori, let's just open that pipeline up for more Māori to just roll down that, and let's get another judge in so we can just make more room for Māori to be in front of courts. As much as it might irritate people to hear that, the fact of the matter is this is a true and ongoing and historic, terrible, terrible reality. And why do I know that? Because I used to work in the courts. And I used to work with young people, used to work in the family harm court and family harm teams more recently, Mr. Speaker. And it showed the racial profiling. It showed how there's an expectation. When you look at the screen, this is a little bit of context, Mr. Speaker, sorry, just to tolerate that a little bit if you might. So you can imagine the screen comes up in the morning, 25 cases reported, then you got this mugshot, and they choose the worst mugshot of this Māori guy. It's just like they get the worst photo and put it up there. And every piece of information, 5 sheets following, that describes this person is based on that horrible photo in that picture. If we can address that kind of racism, that systemic racism, those issues which are all about oppression, poverty, let's have a look at that. And then I might even say you might need to reduce the judges, Mr. Speaker. But let me just put those points in front in the very first reading, and I look forward to the next. Kia ora tātou.
Better photos, and hey, wouldn't having more judges kind of like, I don't know, help Māori get out of jail?
Yeah, she can hit and miss when she comes to her speeches.
But I agree with having better photos.
Yeah. I'm just going to go back to a thing that was mentioned a bit before. Are we behind when it comes to our courts? Because you mentioned that, Nick, that we were on a lot of paper, and are we quite behind in terms of the comparable countries that we compare ourselves to? Are they digital over there, and we're still quite behind when it comes to the courts and digitization and stuff?
Yeah, massively. I mean, hugely. Yeah. I mean, I think you could compare it to like pre-internet for a start. There a lot of comparable court systems are operating with the benefit of the internet. You submit your documents to the court, through internet-enabled systems, and then you just go down to the court. This is from the lawyer's perspective. You go down to court, and then you sit in front of a screen, and all of the documents that you will be talking to are right in front of you there. There's no need to bring, huge amounts of paper documentation with you.
You don't get it blown away down Lambton Quay on the way to the courthouse?
None of that, yeah. So every documentation will be submitted to the court, and then it just comes up on a screen. So, we're in the dark ages.
Was it work and income still have a very weird quasi system where they've got to effectively have stuff located in 4 different programs to sit down there and do just their basic things. The only government department that I'd say is well into the 21st century would be IRD and the Electoral Commission. And in the case of the Electoral Commission was the fact that they contracted out to New Zealand Post. So New Zealand Post, they were quite well ahead of it. Put it this way, the Electoral Commission was well ahead of the laws when it came to digitising. In the case of IRD, they spent $1 billion to bring up to the system we have now, where effectively everything is digitised and it's very well up there. But it's taken a long time from when that project first got announced to when it's actually happening. It's been 10 years, at least 10 years. So it is depending on that. I mean, work and income still pays benefit using the payment system called SWIFT, which is a system from the 1980s. I mean, put it this way, SWIFT cannot cope with people working weekends. SWIFT cannot cope with public holidays and early benefit payments. It is.
So
it's out of date.
You're right, Sam. I mean, the MSD have a project at the moment called Te Pai Tawhiti, which is the project to upgrade all of their IT systems. But I think it's on track at the moment. But
it could be derailed by the government.
It's subject to budget constraints, but we really need it to go in because ultimately.
Yeah. You shouldn't have to ring up MSD, wait on hold for an hour to say, hi, can you please open the drop link box so I can upload my documents?
Yeah.
Is there not a ministry for digitising government, or is that more?
No.
No.
No. Put it this way: your local school or local secondary school will be well ahead of the game than a government department.
Is it because of budget constraints, or is it because of lack of government funding, lack of?
It could also be CEOs. It could be budgets. It could be the fact that it could be ad hoc. Like the WINS system they've got is kind of like it's trying to copy the IRD system, but it's not. Like I refer to my MSD as like using my IR in kids mode.
Right.
That's the best way of describing it. And the thing is, you sit there and explain to someone who's never had an interaction with an MSD or use my MSD,
yeah.
They don't understand because they go, but it's like my IR, but it's nothing like my IR. I mean, you can't sit there and go, hey, can you please sit there and do this? If you want to sit there and try and get information that ain't in their short, narrow prescription of information they give out, you've got to ring up. And half the time when you ring up, you get given what was on my MSD, which doesn't answer your question. And then you have to sit down and go for it. And depending on the staff member, sometimes they have to actually go and get a supervisor because it's like, I don't know what they're asking for. So you get all sorts of things in there. Now, we're running a bit into overtime, so let's get into the final part of the show of the submissions coming up for this week. I know it's not a parliamentary submission, but the Te Aotearoa Manawatu Tauranga Toll Road submission. Please make sure you get them in. Your submissions are due tomorrow night. Armed shooting clubs, shooting ranges, other amendments bill. You've got until the 29th of October to sit there and do that, which is one day after Labor Day. The District Court Judge Amendment Bill. You've also got till the 29th of October. Here's what we've got to sit there and say is, one judge ain't going to quite do the job. The Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill. You've got until midnight tonight to get that submission in. The Taxation for 2024-2025 Emergency Response and Remedial Bill. You've got until Wednesday, 9th of October to get that in. The Marine Coastal, was it Takutai Moana Customary Marine Titles Amendment Bill? You've got till Tuesday the 15th to get your submission in. And the Regulatory Systems Primary Industry Amendment Bill, you've got till Friday the 18th, and I love how the panels are trying to figure out how to line up the hands in the right places. So, yeah, it's, yeah. So, yes, there's a few submissions due in there. I think the District Court one, we should all go in and say, what ain't quite enough? We think the number should be way higher.
Yep.
And come up with, say, 225 or something that actually sits down there and basically jumps it right up. Well, for Dave to put on there, that's what happens when two admins sit there and go to do the same thing.
I'm going to push the button.
So many bills, so little time, just like it's supposed to be. Many of those bills aren't going through the usual truncated committee processes. Some of them have been up there for us to do for the last 3 weeks. Like that social workers one's been in the system for 3 weeks now. So, yeah. Whereas like Crown Minimal's Amendment Bill was in for one show and gone the next. And then we're covering a show not even a week later.
Nick, to answer your question in the chat, there is a Discord. You just have to be a member of the Patreon to join it.
Yes, if you want to support the show, you sit there and do it. Oh, and let's go onto YouTube to sit there and see how our stats are looking and how much closer we are to getting partnership. So let's give it a go. So we're at 234 subscribers and we got 2,345 public hours watched. We need 3,500 subscribers to get the partnership. So for those out there, please get your friends all to like and subscribe and get friends to watch the hours. But I think at the rate we're going, we collectively could get up there. All you've got to do is have the number of viewers watching the show, all of us watching for a solid, 2 hours, and that will up that total by 30.
So close, no matter how far. I should start playing Metallica now.
Yeah. Okay, so we will sit there and wrap it up for tonight. I hope, like hell, I don't know what's going to happen next week. There are select committee hearings for oral submissions. We'll cover more about the Crown Minerals Amendment Bill. We don't have to cover any more parliamentary bills because the House is still in recess because of school holidays. So, so we will come back next week. Probably the Crown Minerals Amendment Bill. I think the other select committee one they're doing oral submissions on is the vaping bill.
Oh, that's a good bill.
Yeah. So that will be for next week. And thanks to our panel for sitting there joining us. Feel free to stay over for after show chats. And for those who are watching, we're going to roll the opening credits and you have a good evening.
Thank you for watching the Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/itsinthaballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's